The background on this session, Creating Economic Justice for All, is SVN's history. So SVN has been around for 26 years, and in the early years, there was a very, very strong focus on environmental responsibility and environmental sustainability. And we recruited someone named Ed Duggar. Do people know Ed Duggar? Yeah, well, wonderful SVN member. And he came to his first SVN conference and he thought, where is the economic justice? Where are all the people? You guys talk about social and economic justice, but all I'm really hearing about are companies and nonprofits that are focusing on environmental responsibility. So he and about a dozen other SVN members started working very hard to both create a more diverse and inclusive organization, but also to make sure that we were really operating at that intersection of environmental responsibility and economic justice. And I'm thrilled to have Beth Williams back with us. It's been a little while. And Robert Raben, who's joining us for the first time, and Mark Watson, who really was the person that drove this, that created this session for us. And Mark is on our board, and he is an incredible innovator, an incredible bridger, very, very committed to economic justice and leveraging the triple bottom line business community and creating more awareness about how we can collaborate so that we are working at that intersection. So Mark, thank you for making this happen. And he's going to be emceeing this panel. And I spoke with Beth and I spoke with Robert, and you all have their bios in the program book. Very, very impressive backgrounds. But I said, can you tell me a little bit more about what makes you tick, what drives you, so that I can share something a little more colorful and personal. So this is what I'd like to share with you. So Robert Raben finds himself at a challenging intersection of the moneyed, the talented, and the disenfranchised, trying to figure out each day how to make sense of our disparities. He kicks ass in cards, and his firm requires a sense of humor clause in all of its contracts. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, I think SVN's going to start doing that too. And Beth Williams is a woman driven by passion to see that the many who are overlooked get an opportunity to succeed, a passion to drive social change through economic opportunity in some of the poorest areas in America, a passion to see urban revitalization be more than just jargon and gentrification be for all and not just some. Beth is the voice for those not heard. And Beth, Robert, and Mark are people that aren't only talking the talk, they're actually making change happen in their local communities and in affecting systemic change all over this country. So please join me in welcoming Beth, Robert, and Mark.
Thank you all for making time in your day. Is this on? To participate. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the genesis of this discussion. The genesis of this discussion is something that I think most of us in this room have experienced, which is that you go to socially responsible workshops, and we all know the different groups, and often the composition in the room is fairly narrow and homogeneous. And yet the demographics of this country, and if you even extend it beyond the borders, doesn't look like the people who are in the room. And so we wave the banners of social justice and green and inclusiveness, and yet from a practical standpoint, we haven't done our job to open up those borders. And so we wanted to have a conversation today, and you may not have read all the bios, but I'll just let you know who's sitting before you. We have someone who, from a practical experience, has taken an organization, a for-profit organization, and grown it exponentially in some challenging environments. Beth runs the largest African-American-owned business in Boston and perhaps Massachusetts, owned by a woman. Tremendous story, and she'll talk about that. And then Robert is the former Deputy Attorney General under Janet Reno. So I tell you that so you know that we have powerhouses who deal with public policy, know how to engage with policymakers, but also know the practicalities of running a business in a tough environment. So with that, I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about your point of view, but the first question I'm going to ask both of you, because they both own for-profit businesses, to talk about how this concept of economic justice affects their day-to-day decisions, as well as some of the longer-term strategic decisions as they run their businesses. Now, do you have a...
I'm going first. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I work in politics and policy in Washington. Yeah. It's a cheap line, but it happens to be true. It's great to be out of Washington. I deeply, deeply appreciate what I think you all collectively are interested and organized around. I know that you come at it from different perspectives. It's folks running a business, growing a business, trying to get investment for a business. Some of you are investors. And I work at a firm that intersects with each of the cohort I just said. And you're making the country a better place. I know it's hard, but I'm here in part to do my tiny bit of cheerleading to make sure that you keep your eye on what you're focused on. It's a tough environment, and I know, and I imagine folks spend a lot of time. Important folks spend a lot of time patronizing, condescending. They certainly do to me. But I find ways, in part, coming to visit with people who are like-minded to embolden myself. So I run a public policy firm in Washington. There are 50 of us. We've been in business about 12 years. And so we're lobbyists, and we're proud of that. But we run campaigns, and we run some of the hardest campaigns that the nation sees. We are lead lobbyists and communicators on reproductive rights. We run the immigration reform effort. We've not done very well at that for the last 7 years, but we keep at it. We run an exceptionally large effort to improve service delivery around domestic violence, create a national infrastructure for that. Over-incarceration, crack cocaine sentencing disparity, minimum mandatory drug laws, medical marijuana, a lot of stuff like that. You get a sense of who we are. So we're unusual in two ways. The vast majority of the work that we do is for not-for-profits, although we work for some of the largest corporations in the world and are happy to, Google, Prudential, et cetera. And separately, we are 92% minority and female. And so we are lawyers, mostly, decently paid, whose existence, given our size and what we get to work on, the White House, in the Senate, in the House, in NGOs, our existence belies a very sad and continuing canard, which is that minority professionals just can't do the hard stuff, can't do the real stuff. We're great at HR. Every once in a while, if black folks in your community are having a dispute, we need an African American to come out and explain why the company's right. I mean, that stuff people understand. But the budget, the deal, forget it. I'm overstating a little bit, but just a little bit. So I'm extremely proud that we've got 12 years of getting up every day and pushing back against a very sad lie. We are busier than we are lucrative. And it's for two reasons, and I think a lot of you probably can resonate with that. It's a for-profit firm. I have to make more each quarter than I spend, or most quarters. But we are busier than we are lucrative for two reasons. One, we do not-for-profit advocacy, which means it's labor-intensive and they don't have a lot of money. And two, there's a devaluation of minority talent. It's just a fact. Women and African Americans and Hispanics and openly gay people, with some exception, Project Runway, are simply devalued in the marketplace, and we don't have either the experience or the collective resources to do anything about that. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So I'll talk more in more of the Q&A, but to the question that Mark posed about economic justice, economic injustice is part of our nation's strength. And I say that obviously with irony. I'm not proud of it. But where we are in this great nation is deeply rooted in injustice by law. And the vestiges of that aren't actually vestiges. They exist today. The disgusting state of much of public education in much of urban America, and obviously there are great exceptions to that, but the disgusting state of public education is a collective national decision that we don't give a shit about certain cohorts of people. I could go on and on. You've got a sense of my politics. So every single moment of every single day is spent navigating a system in which the power structure is set up in a particular way. It's a definition of capitalism. And so I've devoted our company's resources to doing its part as public policy. We work on the laws, the regulation of our lives, economic laws, social justice laws, to bring different voices to that fight and to do our part to make sure that people who see what I just said and don't act like that's a big damn surprise, but people who know that are at the table helping make the decisions. And it's a blessing to be able to do that, and rough.
Thank you. Beth, would you talk a little bit about your firm and then your thoughts about how justice plays into decision making?
So I won't get into too much of the. I have a big mouth too. I don't know. Do you guys need this? Did you need this? Okay. So I won't get into too much about my bio. A lot of you have read it, and some of you know. But I'm an entrepreneur. Sort of been termed or coined the accidental entrepreneur. I took over the business when my dad died suddenly in November of 2002. So I'm thinking this will be what, my 12th year, 14th year. What, 12, 14? I don't know. Okay, so I'm a little tired. So whatever, whoever did the math. But so, I mean, I sort of fell into it. But, you know, one of the things that I can say is that I grew up in a household with a father who was a civil rights attorney, fought for welfare for work mothers in the 60s, couldn't get a job, with a degree from Brown, Navy SEAL, BU log degree, other than a janitor in the 60s. And he said, you know what, I'm going to start my own business. And he was one of the first to open up grocery stores in Boston. He was a serial entrepreneur. And he really believed that economic development was the key to fixing many of the social problems that we have in our communities across the country, and particularly in minority communities, that we in minority communities need to stop asking for people to do for us and really begin to do for ourselves. So, I mean, if you're listening to that around the kitchen table all the time, it somehow probably soaks in, you know. And though I did choose a different path, and I worked in corporate America for probably 13 years. And then when he died, I did take on the business, but mainly because I did believe in what he stood for, and that is that economic, you know, justice is critical to the survival of our nation. So, you know, for me, economic justice is what the driving force really behind my business. For as I believe, as my father did, that, you know, we provide good wage earning jobs and talent and ways that, you know, and these are ways that help to fix a lot of the social maladies. When people are given an opportunity to be trained, to learn a different skill set, and then to be able to see that they've done something with it and someone appreciates them, it's a remarkable transformation of a person who's been left out of the system. So, you know, oh, sorry, okay. Because the way I see it is inner cities across America, and this is what are spiraling into what I call systematic dysfunction. We see the prison systems are like a revolving door, right? Recidivism is, they're talking about the violence in the inner city. Those guys are hustling. What's so different from what they're doing and what Al Capone and those guys did, right? There's not much of a difference, except these guys need an opportunity. And so, you know, so when I thought about, you know, the economic justice piece, when Mark asked me to do this, you know, I started thinking it seems like our prisons are the new school system for a lot of young men, and particularly young men of color who get caught for like a nominal drug fee or some offense. And once that happens, they no longer have a story, a chance to explore their dreams because they now have a CORI, which is a criminal offender's record, and that now becomes their story, regardless of whether they were an A, B, C student, whatever, fabulous football player, whatever the opportunities were. You know, once they get arrested over foolishness, that CORI stays with them. And so some of the things, and as you'll hear a little later on, my passion is really, really around prison reform. And so I'm very, very interested in that. So my day-to-day commitment to economic change is hiring at-risk people, many of whom turn out to be my best workers. The sad part is that when my business takes a downturn and I have to lay people off, many go back to the same lifestyle they knew, hustling to get money, since they too are like many of us, have children, expenses, etc. The saddest thing I learned this summer when my business took a sizable loss, and I had to lay people off, one of my employees went back to jail and the other was shot. And those are both heartbreaking because I had seen these guys, they worked for me for 5 years and they were making tremendous strides. They could put a cartridge together like nobody else. And but so those are things that are tough when you do employ people that may be incarcerated and come out. Some are able to fix themselves and some aren't. So my long-term strategic decision on identifying the industries that are synergistic and what I believe to partner with. I'm doing a significant amount of due diligence around companies that use contract prison labor, as well as working with policy makers and some private industries on developing a contract manufacturing workplace or workforce development site. It's one thing to be taught in school as opposed to really getting the hands-on knowledge, which these folks can take. A lot of them don't have the time to go back to community schools. They don't have the resources to go back to some of these community colleges. They need jobs, and so we have to figure out a way to make that happen. Like, for example, at our factory, I think we sort of exemplify in an indirect way that basic workforce training. All of our factory workers are trained in the basics for coming to work dressed properly in a timely manner. They've learned how to read detailed manufacturing instructions, quality control procedures, inventory control procedures, shipping and receiving logistics, warehouse logistics, customer service, break fix. The list could go on. I mean, those are all skill sets, though you may have to learn the specific product, but they are transferable skill sets, right? So part of our overall company process is cross-training. So that should an employee choose to leave or be asked to leave, or asked to leave, they can do so, and they have a skill set that they can take with them. But however, most of my employees, have been with me at least 5 to 6 years on average, and so that speaks highly about the company. And we pay above minimum wage. We offered medical, dental, life, long-term and short-term disability, and yeah, we feel like I'm very, very. That's what I'm committed to, is seeing economic development, because it's not just my job, but it's the bodegas and it's the little nail salons and the hair salons and all of the smaller Main Street businesses that are around mine. When my folks go to lunch or at Christmas time or holidays and got to go buy that Easter basket, they're going to run next door or run down the street. That's what is economic development.
So I appreciate both of you talking about how in your own concerns you try to move the ball forward on economic justice. And you've been very real. It's a tough challenge. And often there are real rewards for undertaking tough challenges. And I was wondering if both of you might spend a couple moments talking about what reinforcement, positive reinforcement, are you getting from the ecosystem because you've taken on this challenge, whether it's vendors, customers, politicians, the mayor, the president. Share it for others who might be thinking about how to incorporate justice initiatives in their own business models. What are some of the rewards of undertaking this?
She wants me to go first.
All right, since I took notes, I did my questions this morning. Anyways, okay, does your company get recognized for its work? We've gotten a significant amount of recognition. We've gotten a significant amount of recognition for the work that we've done. In 2011, I was Ernst & Young Social Entrepreneur of the Year. the Urban Leagues, President's Award, ABCD, Outstanding Community. I mean, the awards, not trying to be, the list could go on. But one of the things those are all niceties and stuff, but I would prefer to have those organizations support me and buy my products, right? You know what I mean? It's nice to have a plaque. It's nice to have all of those things, and it does make you feel good that people do value what you do. But even so, even if they don't buy my product, at least come and talk to me and say, Beth, how are you able to decide what offenders to keep and what ones not to? You know, at least try to kind of understand. And very few of them do that. There are one or two that are really very large organizations in Boston that have made a very strong commitment to it. And I'm excited to see where that goes. But yeah, I mean, we've gotten recognized at, you know, probably because how the hell did that happen? But
so I work in public policy in Washington, lobbying and communications and advocacy, and we're at the top of the non-corporate game. After 10 years of doing it and kind of the people I've been able to attract, we work directly with the president and his staff, senators, congresspeople, justices of the court on public policy issues. And so we are at a moment in time, it's taken a couple hundred years to get there, but we're at a moment in time where minority professionals working on public policy that affects the country are included in not just the conversation, but decision-making about resource allocation. And, you know, so the Attorney General, we're at an amazing moment in time. There's no reason for you to pay this much attention to it, but the nominee to run the Department of Homeland Security came out yesterday as an African-American man. The number 2 there is Cuban-American. And so, God bless the United States. The President of the United States, the top security people, President of the United States, Susan Rice, the National Security Council, and the head of the Department of Homeland Security and the head of the Department of Justice are all black. These are the people keeping us safe. It's a wonderful thing if you think about our 300-year history and what the frame has been about African American males in particular. So on the public policy side, in part because so many minorities are running so many important things, there's a welcome for our voice and our access on paying for it. That's a different story. As you heard me say at the beginning, we are still not at a point where diversity is monetized and commodified in ways that other important aspects of American life are. With small exceptions to that, it's just not there. So we have found in our business model, on the plus side, many, many, many national and some family foundations actually do value the fact that when you come work with a team at the Raben Group, that team is guaranteed to be, we're 70% female. It's guaranteed to be black and Hispanic and Asian and gay and disabled, right? They're not. I don't have to go down the hall and pull Larry out of the broom closet for the meeting. I did have a corporate pitch in San Francisco once, and I realized just by luck of the draw who was interested. Four of the five of us going were African American women, and me. And this was a large corporation in San Francisco. And I did have a moment as a business owner. What am I doing? But it was just a moment, and we've been with them a couple of years. So the markets don't value what we're offering much. So as a business person, you have to find out, well, who does? And where's your niche? And so we have found, interestingly, large foundations. Ford and Kellogg and Robert Wood Johnson and California Endowment, and they value it enormously. It's real for them, and it's actually a positional advantage that we are who we are. And I raise it less about us and more about you. Sometimes if you find that the the people you're talking to aren't valuing what your investor proposal is. Maybe you're not talking to the right people. Maybe there's a market out there that actually you're not socializing with or you're not privy to that would value what you're doing. You may take some compromise. You may have to take your earring out. I don't know. Small compromise, which I was having.
We said we would mix a little. Please, please.
I mean, you're absolutely right, but I mean, sometimes when you go beyond just taking your earring out, you know what I mean? There's certain things that I, as a black woman, probably will never be able to attend unless I come as your date. No, seriously.
Anytime good.
No, it's so funny. I'll tell you this story. It's so funny. When I first met Rob.
Don't.
Oh,
Bring it.
okay.
So,
No, this was so amazing. It was so funny. All I'll say is he brought me into the leftist wing lawyers dinner, like that very first day I met him. He's like, oh yeah, you're gonna come with me to this dinner, and I was like nervous and crazy, but it was like, that's how the type of guy he is. Like I would never have gone to an event like that unless Rob would say, hey, why shouldn't you be there? So I mean, it's people like Rob that sort of say, let's have everybody at the table to see what makes sense.
so one of the, and this is not on the predetermined questions, but one of the things we've been trying to highlight, and to be honest, at SVN we're wrestling with this on the board, and I'm chair of the diversity committee, full disclosure, is what pieces of information are you missing as an organizational leader because your organization is not diverse? Maybe you're short from monetizing it, but maybe you don't have somebody within your organization that has access to either the political veins that will unleash some economic value for you, or even just to protect your organization. And so I wanted both of you sort of to take that answer to a different level and talk about what access do you have, because you have diverse management staffs, to information, opportunities, et cetera, that maybe you wouldn't have if it was homogenous.
I could spend 6 or 7 weeks answering that question because our business is really this. It's really about understanding Black and gay and Asian and Hispanic and disabled America and helping translate constituencies and leadership to policymakers and vice versa. So my problem is kind of the straight white male. I think I have 2 out of 50. If the EEOC will be up my ass at some point. I'm like, well, where do you find them? I Is there a? So I love doing that. I don't welcome any lawsuit, but that one would be, as we say in Washington, that would be on. No, I'll say I don't think it's. I'm not sure this is what you're after, but I'll say it's very, very important. I've learned this in middle age. I didn't know this as a younger person. Diversity is not for everybody. So the left has this fantastic platitude. Diverse candidates. We really want whatever. You know how that goes. It's actually not for everybody. I'm all for a little more rigor. Why are we diverse? What do we mean by diversity? What is the application of diversity for our business, service, product, event? Not everything has to be. The Delta Sigma Theta Convention doesn't have to have a lot of white people. And it will still go on. It's a silly example, but not everything has to be, right? And I'm going to say it in the negative. There's this obeisance on the left to diversity, which is so shallow that it's frequently, and this is true in many corporate America, it's frequently counterproductive. And here's how it rolls, and at law firms it's particularly acute. I've got my senior African-American woman partner. She's really great. It's Kendra, right? Blah, blah, blah. And then Kendra does something that people don't like, and it was either she did something people didn't like, and that was really stupid, or there was a whatever. And then the whole cohort is fucked. Because what it means, particularly to be an ethnic minority in an environment, is to be fungible. You're all the same. Which is not something that the majority, mostly male, but some, if it's a heavily, anyway. The majority doesn't have the fungibility problem, and the minority does. And so when you're in a regime, and this is more acute on the left, the right doesn't even pretend they don't care unless there's a lawsuit. I have little nibbles at diversity. It doesn't work out. I'm pissed off if I'm the board or the management. I tried. It's a long way of saying, or a short way of saying, for those of you who do care deeply about it, who know that it's kind of not a side thing, but it's the thing, that has to come from the top. It has to be a value from the leadership of the organization. That diversity is valued, it's who we are, and here's how it improves us. And that should be articulable. It should not be ephemeral. It should be a very clear, we are a smart organization because. When you have that regime, you have a much better chance at successful implementation, attracting the right people, and markets understanding that. And that's zero. And off and on over the years, it's Pepsi. And it's not Chevron. And many, many thousands of others. But what is, I think, the much bigger problem, particularly on the left, which I think a lot of you all swim around in, is the disingenuous, or the shallow, or the platitudinal interest. That's where you have to be very, very careful when you're working with people or talking about it, being as precise as possible. They're well-meaning. They need your help. What does diversity mean exactly? And why is it important to you? And you have to, I put it on you to be precise about that when you're pushing for this stuff.
Beth, what access? Comments? What access to resources do you think you have because of the diversity of your management? I'm talking about the leadership, not the of your company.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a resource as opposed to, I was thinking about, I'm the only person called in Boston to the Women's Workforce Council, this particular board, that particular board, this, and it's because I'm the only woman of color. Now, is that going to benefit me? I don't know, but it's like, it's giving me exposure, but is it just because, oh my God, let's look through the pile and see who we have? Let's just grab Beth because she's the largest, whatever. I don't know, that's cynical to an extent, but I can't really say that, being, it's leveraged some at some companies that Mark said that are very, Robert said that are very genuine, but, I sometimes feel like it's almost been not so much of a value, but as a, here you are, let's, we need a face,
So, let me phrase it this way. Let's say that the economic justice, which is what we're talking about today, is an investment. Just like civil rights, there were investments made to produce the outcomes. And we in this room are purporting to make investments for economic justice. So maybe we're not getting, all the returns that we hope, but down the road, maybe the next generation does get those. How can we as leaders in our organization work with public policy makers? And Beth, if you would talk about how you have done this to further the ball down the field.
One thing about being, there's some challenges with the public policies, and my biggest, for example, when I was trying to grow and expand my business into Chicago, was really the whole certification aspect of it. Because yes, I could have opened up as a regular business, but I would not have had the competitive advantage of being a minority or woman. And the whole process, which is a policy that I really believe should be addressed, was so intrusive, so time-consuming, so resource-consuming, that it almost got to the point where I was like, I really can't afford to do that. And I was just saying, I was trying to expand a model that I felt was working to a city that had the highest homicide rate that year. You know, but I found that there was very little policy in support of that, or they're still holding on to the policies that worked or allegedly were 20 years ago. And they really, really need to revisit those.
Robert, how would you suggest that leaders engage?
You know, an important piece for people who care about social and corporate change is to have the discipline to be as precise as possible about what you're asking for. It's a complicated world. There's a lot of competing requests. Communications is much more diffused than it used to be, which is good for many of us who struggle to get our voice out there. What a lot of us suffer from in movements, and you all are part of a movement, whether you see yourself that way or not, is lack of clarity or discipline about what we really want. I'm old enough to have been, we want a woman on the Supreme Court. We want a woman on the Supreme Court. We've never had a woman on the Supreme Court. Well, here you go, Sandra Day O'Connor. She's anti-choice. You happy? And you get mad, but the lesson, and I could give you 75, we want an African American to follow Thurgood Marshall in the court. We want an African American. You got Clarence Thomas, you happy? No. And an important lesson, and it's true in broad public life, and it's true when you're telling your daughter to clean her room. Clean your room isn't enough, moving around the edges, put the bedspread on, I clean my room. You didn't clean it. Be precise about what you want. I call it know what success looks like. Because they're not going to do the work for you. And worse, you have opponents. You have people who think this is crap. You have people who think that this isn't the way the markets best improve people's lives. They don't think it's crap, they just think it's inefficient. Be very precise about what success looks like. And I do that at the macro level when you're working on public policy and you want a particular law or regulatory apparatus to change, whether it's an 8A program, a 7D program, or a highway construction financing bond, and you want to be a part of it. Or in the very, very, very micro level when I'm trading with you, what does your board look like? That's important to you. If the composition and diversity of the board is an important value to you, make that clear. So that I think is the piece that most people skip over. They just assume. People understand what we want. People know what we want. It's about, the man or whatever. They don't. They don't. You have to be very, very precise.
So we might have access to policymakers. We can make different vendor choices to move this discussion further. I'm going to ask one final question and then open this up to the audience. And we all have heard the statistics about the demographics and how they're changing and what the consumer base will look like in this country, not in the very distant future. What do both of you think the situation looks like if we don't find a way to intersperse economic justice with private enterprise in this country? What does that look like if we don't make further progress along these lines?
Well, it's a mixed bag. There are pockets of wonderful change. Maynard Jackson, the mayor of Atlanta, transformed the relationship between the business community and African Americans in Atlanta. He created, or helped create, played an important role in boosting a black now upper middle class or upper class with franchise at the airports and on and on and on and on. And so that model of aggressive use of political power for improvements in corporate behavior is going to happen in certain pockets. And then, there's Holmes County, Mississippi, or much of Florida, where I grew up, where there are minority majorities, and the white power structure has no problem holding on and own the banks and still find a way to, and with the evisceration of the Voting Rights Act, it's going to be easier and easier. So you're going to have very different experiences. We're going to have black, brown, struggles. There's no way, let me say it less cynically. It would be amazing to see the first experience in recorded history in any country anywhere in the world where competing and important minority populations ascend to power without friction. So it would be great if it happens. It's not going to happen. And so preparing for, you have two basic strands in public life. Take care of your own, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And people wake up each day with very different orientations. I'm of the latter. Those of you who care about diversity and the use of, gotta be part of the latter. I'll say one last thing. This is not fully formed, and one of my employees one of my coworkers who's quite smart, an African American, he's a political pundit, he's on TV all the time. He pointed out to me the other day, an enormous percentage of the black and brown public policy agenda in this country is ameliorative. It's restorative. It's not 40 acres and a mule per se, but it's about crappy schools and deseg orders and civil rights enforcement and police brutality, and an enormously small percentage of it is about what the white kids, certainly the upper middle class and middle class white kids, are focusing on, which is, digital technology and so and so. It's a forward-looking kind of, where's business going, and where are the black and brown, I'm sure there are many, but where are the black and brown leaders focused on what the world is going to look like 20 and 30 years? He said 10-year-old kids, I don't have this kid, but 10-year-old kids are walking up to TV screens and going like this, right? What are we building for the future for those children? And it was a sad point. I mostly agree with you. It was spending a lot of time, not inappropriately, focused on how the fuck can you still be beating Trayvon Martin to death? And that's right. But that's not going to get us to where we need to be in terms of corporate parity and market equity, and it's just a completely different conversation.
Beth, a couple comments.
I definitely would agree. I mean, it just is always shocking to me. I mean, the Trayvon Martin thing was horrific. My brother was killed just in a very similar manner, and back in 1986. So it had hard strings for me. However, it just amazes me how when we were mobilizing the public around a death, a tragedy that we view as a civil rights violation, but we won't mobilize around the fact that we did not get that 10% of the contracts that we were promised as far as construction jobs. We are not getting the contract that we promised. You know what I mean? I'm being left out of the XYZ Advanced Technology Initiative. And we spend a lot of money, particularly in the city of Boston. $2 billion was spent, and we don't leverage that. And so I think that again, instead of looking outside, we need to look in and really start to mobilize that. And that's only going to be where we're going to see some significant change. Because the same old thing, there's some great folks who are very vocal now that I think I'm very happy for them. Al Sharpton, a bunch of them, great stuff. But my biggest concern is how many of them are actually reaching back into the community, doing something to say, hey, what do we need to do to mobilize to make a difference and get these kids into community arts centers if they don't do well in school? Come up with a plan that, hey, I drop out at 16, but I'm going to learn these skill sets through some workforce training. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we need to get angry about. We need to do. So if you all see me down in the State House by myself,
So that actually, I think, is the point that I want to at least have this discussion at SVN. We have a history of being forward thinkers. And to the point that was just made, which I completely agree with, is we have business models that are driving the conversation. And so we also have an opportunity to add this element to those same models to address some of the concerns. And so I'm going to stop here and ask for a show of it, and I guess I'll just hand the mic out. And if you guys will just go here and if you pass it. Please state your name and your organization.
My name is Joe James. I'm actually a former SVN member and board member. And my first comment is deja vu. Years ago, the last board meeting I attended was about 12 years ago. And the issue of inclusiveness was an item then. And obviously, the bad news is that it still is. But the good news is that it still is. I'm a Sputnik baby, so I love science. But Dr. King was killed in my junior year in college. And I had to make a decision, and when you looked at the surroundings of his death, it was his recognition that with all the civil rights laws in place, if you didn't have the economic wherewithal to enjoy liberty, you didn't enjoy it. It didn't really mean that much. I have 3 points I'd like to make. First of all, I think it is critical for SVN to be more visible in its interest in minority business and in communities of color in this country, which may not be as sexy as doing a project in Africa, but there is tremendous poverty. And I'm now a Southerner, and I was just appalled at the chronic rural poverty in South Carolina and the rest of the Black Belt. In fact, 90-some% of poor African Americans live in the Black Belt. So we certainly have our urban challenges, but we also have some rural challenges as well. As I look back over the last 20, 30 years, there used to be more helpful programs for minority businesses, both at the federal level and other places. There were MESBIT in minority companies. They don't exist anymore. I'm a technology company owner, and quite often I'm the only black face in the room. And I have people asking me, well, how did you get your technology? As if I'm not supposed to have it. Do you understand what I'm saying? I had an investor from New England who we had a signed agreement. They'd given us earnest money, thank God, and we had a set deal. And then they came back a few months later and said, we really don't like that deal. And they didn't say this exactly, but the essence of what they said is, we really want to own your entire company. And of course, I would resist that. And I remember one of the conversations that we had was, the guy said, listen, Joe, I'm the big dog. I got the money. You're going to listen. You're going to do whatever I tell you to do. So obviously that was not the kind of partner that we would like as an entrepreneur. I'm glad you raised the issue. You may not have said it exactly, but the black community has a responsibility to position and organize itself to be a better economic engine. I became an economic development professional for more than 30-some years, and there's no way you can execute an economic plan without a strategy. Yet the African American community does not have an economic development strategy. So whether you talk to the Joint Center or the NAACP or whomever it is, there really is no plan. And some of the issues that you raised have to be part of an overall strategy that the community, in my opinion, has to execute and then get embracement from and support from the majority community to make some of the things that need to happen. One last point. On a policy matter, and this hit me after the guy said, the big dog spoke to me. So I looked at my assets. Now, as a fairly responsible older person, I've put considerable money into my retirement accounts. And the way that the retirement...
He's not wearing a wedding ring.
Well, that doesn't mean I'm not married, but the point is that I would love to invest my own retirement funds in my own business, but I'm prevented from doing that. That's a policy decision that basically says Wall Street gets the money and you can't. So on a policy matter, it's my calculation that of the $4.6 trillion that are in retirement accounts, that if only 10% of that was freed up so that those of us who wish to invest in our own companies or create our own social serving nonprofits, that would be $460 billion that would be free and open to do the kinds of things that need to get done. So
Your Congressman Jim Clyburn is number 3 in the House, and your Senator Lindsey Graham is on the Finance Committee. Go talk to them. Go set up an appointment and talk to them about
been there, done that. Now, what Congressman Clyburn's office will say is they have to respond to legislation brought to them by others. So, I mean, there's a little trickiness to that. Not to say that Jim's not supportive of this concept.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your comments, and we only have 10 minutes. They have twice. So.
Okay. Okay, just a quick question for Rob then. I understand the value and the importance of policy work, but I feel that, because of the nature of policy work being perceived as maybe boring or taking a long time to really make effective changes for this community, maybe it hasn't like garnered as much of a foothold in terms of doing policy work. So my question is, like, what policy issues are you working on right now that has, maybe the most impact on economic justice, and what do you see from us that you could take away? Like, what support can we give you in terms of these policy changes?
Well, thank you very much. Comprehensive immigration reform would bring 11 million people into a system in which they're not, so they have false Social Security numbers, so they're paying into Social Security, but they can't redeem that because it's not really them. It's just amazing what the economic rejiggering would be if we could bring folks out of the shadows and into minimum wage campaigns and the variety of things that we want to do. So that's pretty big. Virtually everything that we work on has an impact on how resources are distributed. There's the extremely parochial, most people have no way of paying attention to this, but 68 million people rely on a 401k. Within a 401k, African American, Hispanics, Asians, and whites behave wildly differently. It's mostly about gender. So black women are coming out of 25, 30 years of employment. 68 million people have a 401k. This is not like some other. Black women come out of an experience with 1/3 to 40% of the assets of a white man. And that is held even for income levels. And it's because African American women are overwhelmingly relying on withdrawal of the money to pay for something, paying an interest penalty on return. There isn't portability from one company to another that's easy, blah, 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 blah. You're right, it's boring. It's totally boring. And it's this gas in the air. Public policy is gas in the air on which you rely. And there are two choices in life. Two people controlling your destiny, you and everybody else. And so this kind of notion, I'm not going to castigate you or your community, but I do this for a living, this notion that, well, that's not really my fight. You're handing the man tools to reify a system which works well for a lot of people, not many whom you care about. I'll give you one small example of that. The most successful thing the right has done in this country in the last 30 years in terms of economic issues is they have carried out a war on the taxation of unearned income. They made up this trope about a death tax and capital gains as destroying jobs. It's a war they launched. It was funded by 6 or 7 families, the Mars family, the Walton family, the McClatchy family, the Gallo family. And they won that war. And the tax on capital gains in your lifetime has gone from 55% to 15%. And the taxation on the working man is up. It's either up on the federal level or concomitantly up on the state level to pay for federal cutbacks in Title I, Medicaid, blah, 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 blah. If you fucking think that doesn't affect stuff you care about, You don't live in the world I live in. And I watch these men and women every day, extremely well-funded, make the case for why carried interest, I'm going to bore you to tears. Carried interest is the fee that hedge fund managers make on the deal. They fought to the max for that fee to be taxed as a capital gain, 15%, as opposed to earned income, which could be, if you live in New York City, 55%. They won that fight because you're sitting around thinking, carried interest. This is going on every single day. So you don't have a choice. I know you have a choice. I know you have a choice. But communities that you care about, we cannot act like public policy is this luxury for people who want to do that. In a representative democracy, men and women are elected to regulate resource allocation. If you're not in that game, you are handing people you can't stand a victory. Say one last thing. This is just my fantasy. Imagine a world, close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Imagine a world in which the Hispanic caucus or the Black caucus acted like the Tea Party caucus in Congress. And Raul Grijalva or Maxine Waters or Barbara Lee said, we had the majority for a long time. And they said to Nancy Pelosi or Dick Gephardt, you know what, we're not going to support the motion to adjourn to go home. You can open your eyes now. We are not going to support the motion to adjourn till we go home until there is a strategy to reduce black unemployment to 9% of this country. And America would say, oh, look, it's the Back to Africa movement. It's the Black Panther Party. Ooh, ooh, ooh. But that's okay. These people aren't elected by white people. They have majority black districts. Imagine, I say that to say the timidity of black and Hispanic elected leadership, generally speaking, in this country, is very strong. So I don't like those Tea Party guys, but I tell you, I learned an important lesson from them. We haven't even gotten started on how we're supposed to fight.
We have time for one more question. I know it's hot, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Okay, I want to go back to something that you said at the beginning, Mark, which is that social ventures are, at this point, very comfortable with with environmental goals, environmental policy, and it's easy to benchmark. Using recycled paper, offsetting carbon footprint, solar panels on the roof. So do you have any thoughts about what the benchmarks would be if we started to hold social ventures accountable around economic justice?
Oh, sure. I have a lot of thoughts. But you know, the best thoughts are those that you come up with as a community, whether it's consensus or collaboration, however is your ability as a group to come out what your metrics are. But you know, the obvious ones are inclusion. Inclusion doesn't guarantee outcome, but it's a damn good start. And you have to have enough inclusion so it's not tokenism. So inclusion, and you know, I'd run a campaign if I were you. I'd start branding organizations that have all white leadership or all male leadership as illegitimate. It's to take them out of this kind of normative, right? It's to change the norm. Like, you don't exist. And you're fighting the power because you're talking about probably Cablevision or, I don't know, I won't call out companies, but there are lots of companies that have no female board members. So that means in 2013 you're not trying. So a campaign to take that out of the norm would be a great campaign. You know, inclusion is very important. Pay equity. People worry about the ratio between the CEO and the lowest paid. Rich people actually are susceptible to shame. Shame is actually a fine public policy strategy. It doesn't have the effect it used to have for Hester Prynne, but it still works. So define outcomes that you think are generally acceptable outcomes. But the most important thing actually is not defining it, it's a strategy. What then am I going to do to change behavior which thus far has very little incentive to change? And that's the essence of organizational and social change. What's my strategy? Shame is a strategy. Boycott is a lousy strategy. It's hard to get very busy moms who are like, if I'm 1 minute late to pick up my kid, it's $5. What? It's very, very, very hard to get busy people to follow your boycott. But there are strategies that do work. And I'm very interested in the one I said, the kind of the rebranding of organizations as illegitimate. CalPERS, the Alabama Pension Retirement System, TIA, CREF, Calvert. You know, I do complain about the modesty of their efforts and how much more I'd like it to be. But I'm not that, I'm a pragmatist. I don't run away from people because they don't give me 100% of what I want. It's my whole dating life, by the way. So learn from them, Calvert and CalPERS, and they have figured out a way to move institutions. They helped get us out of South Africa. And so I don't know your politics, but a lot of people on the left that I have dinner parties with were purists. Oh, well, they invest in defense. Okay. You don't like defense? Anyway.
So I want to thank both of our speakers for sharing, and I know you got to run, but receive the applause. And hopefully this has been a conversation which was sort of a slow warm-up to a more volatile ending, which is both of their personalities, actually. But this was a chance to talk about some issues that we're wrestling with here at SVN. And the hope is the next time a couple of people are sitting in this room, it's not deja vu, it's we did it. So thank you for coming. Thank you for letting us, put this on the agenda, and enjoy the rest of the conference.